Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are clearing off the desk. Literally, we usually have a mix of articles, maybe a book or two. But today, I am just looking at this stack of legal documents that is, well, it's frankly intimidating.
It's a lot to get your head around, for sure.
I mean, we've got House bills, we have Title 49 of the Pennsylvania Code, Board of Pharmacy newsletters. It looks so dry on paper,
Yeah.
But when you actually start reading it, it's a drama.
It really is. It's a drama about access, about money, about public safety, and really about the people we trust with our lives every single time we pick up a prescription.
Exactly. We are doing a comprehensive summary of Pennsylvania pharmacy state laws, and before you hit skip thinking, I'm not a pharmacist, why do I care? Let me just stop you right there.
Yeah, this affects everyone.
Do you take medication? Do your parents take medication? Have you ever stood in that line at the pharmacy and just wondered, why on earth does it take 20 minutes to put a few pills in a bottle?
Or, and this is the big one from the last couple of years, why you couldn't get your ADHD medication for 3 months straight.
Right. That's the hook. That's the stuff we're going to answer today. We are going to decode the sort of invisible machinery that governs that pharmacy counter. And to set the stage, we really need to look at the calendar. Today is Sunday, February 15th, 2026.
And that date is absolutely crucial. If we were having this conversation 5 years ago, or even 2 years ago, it would be a very, very different deep dive, a much shorter one.
How so?
We are sitting right in the middle of a massive transition period, a real sea change in how pharmacy is practiced in the state.
It really feels like the tectonic plates of the profession are shifting. I was looking at the timeline you mapped out in the research, and it's just wild. We have this bedrock law, the Pharmacy Act of 1961. 1961. I mean, JFK was inaugurated that year. That's how old this foundational law is.
It's a total legacy law. It was written for a world of typewriters and, independent pharmacies with soda fountains, a completely different era of medicine.
But then you fast forward to now. And it's like an explosion of legislation. We've got Act 140 of 2020, Act 77 of 2024, a whole slew of new regulations that just dropped in 2025.
Right.
It feels like after 50, 60 years of relative silence, the Pennsylvania legislature suddenly woke up and decided to rewrite the entire rule book all at once.
Well, they had to. The profession had completely outgrown the old laws. The workforce itself changed. The drug supply chain was unrecognizable with these massive middlemen called PBMs.
We will definitely get to them.
Oh, we will. And the clinical capability of pharmacists themselves just exploded. So the law is finally playing catch-up to the reality on the ground.
So our mission today is to take all this legalese, all this Title 49, Title 28 stuff, and turn it into actionable understanding. I want to know who is standing behind that counter, what are they legally allowed to do, and what rights do I have as a patient walking up to it.
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, I want to start with the biggest, most visible change. If I walk into a pharmacy today, right now, in February 2026, the team behind the counter literally looks different. And I don't just mean the faces, I mean the badges. The legal status of the people helping me has completely, totally shifted.
We are talking about the workforce revolution, and that's not an exaggeration. Specifically, the regulation of pharmacy technicians.
This was the part of the research that honestly shocked me the most. Until very, very recently, Pennsylvania didn't regulate pharmacy techs at all.
It sounds wild, doesn't it? But yes, until Act 140 was fully implemented, and really the regulations for that only went into effect on June 28, 2025. Pennsylvania was one of only 4 states in the entire country that treated pharmacy technicians as, essentially, unlicensed help.
So just to be clear, practically speaking, in the olden days, which was literally last year, a pharmacist could just hire someone off the street.
I mean, it was subject to the pharmacist's own professional discretion and their own liability, but yes. From the state's perspective, there was no registry. There was no mandatory state-level background check specific to the Board of Pharmacy. You were working under the pharmacist's license, but you didn't hold one of your own from the state.
That is both terrifying and fascinating at the same time, but that's all over now.
It is over. We have officially entered the era of mandatory registration. As of June 2025, if you are working as a technician in Pennsylvania, you must be registered with the State Board of Pharmacy. Full stop.
But there's a catch, right? A pretty big one, because we're in February 2026. We are in what you called the grace period.
Correct. When you roll out a law this big that affects tens of thousands of people, you can't just flip a switch and fire everyone on day one. So the state, wisely, created a transition window.
A runway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Technicians who are already working when these regulations dropped have until June 28, 2026 to get registered.
So the clock is ticking.
Huh.
And it's ticking loudly.
Very loudly. We are, what, about 4 months away from that hard cutoff? If you are a technician listening to this, or if you manage a pharmacy and you haven't processed that paperwork yet, you are walking on very thin ice. Come July, if you aren't registered, you aren't legally allowed to work behind that counter.
So let's unpack the new hierarchy. Because it's not just one generic tech role anymore, is it? The law actually created different tiers.
Yeah. And this is all about professionalization. It's a move away from just having bodies filling a role to creating a genuine career ladder. So Tier 1, the entry point, is the pharmacy technician trainee.
This is the absolute entry level.
The absolute ground floor. The minimum age here is 16 years old.
16. So we're literally talking about high school students.
Exactly. Think about vocational students, or just a kid looking for a part-time job after school. The state wants to build a pipeline. They want young people to see pharmacy as a viable career path, something they can start early.
But I assume because they are 16 and largely untrained, the leash has to be very, very tight.
Oh, incredibly tight. First, the registration itself is temporary. A trainee registration is only valid for 2 years. And, this is the critical part, it is non-renewable.
Oh, wow. So it's an up or out system.
Precisely. You cannot be a career trainee. The state is basically saying, we will give you 2 years. You can get your hours, get your training, and figure out if you like this work. But after 24 months, you either have to upgrade to a full registered technician or you have to leave the pharmacy.
And supervision must be a nightmare.
The law uses the phrase direct and immediate personal supervision, which means the pharmacist has to be right there watching. You aren't leaving a 16-year-old trainee alone to run the shop while you go to lunch. That's a huge no-no.
Okay, so that's the trainee, the first rung on the ladder. Then you graduate to the main event, the registered pharmacy technician.
This is the new professional standard. To get this title, you must be at least 17 years old, and you absolutely must possess a high school diploma or a GED.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the real barrier to entry, the thing that separates this new era from the old Wild West, is the mandatory training requirement.
You can't just learn by osmosis anymore. You can't just watch the person next to you and pick it up.
No. You must complete a board-approved training program. Now, the board was smart about this. They didn't want to destroy the workforce supply overnight by forcing everyone to go to a specialized 2-year college program.
Right, that would have been a disaster.
A total disaster. So they allow for multiple pathways. They allow employer-based program.
So if I work for a big chain, a CVS, a Walgreens, a Rite Aid, they probably have their own internal university that the board has already signed off on.
Exactly right. Or you can use a military training program if you have that background, or a program that's accredited by the ASHP, that's the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. They give you options.
Now, this is the part I'm really curious about. I'm thinking about the person who has been working at my local independent pharmacy for 20 years. You know, the one who knows everyone's name, knows more about drugs than some fresh graduates. Did the state really force them to go back to school?
That was the single biggest fear during this whole process. You have this incredibly experienced, loyal workforce, and the last thing you want to do is insult them or push them out. So the legislature included a grandfathering clause.
I love a good grandfather clause. How does this one work?
It's based on a very specific window of time. If a technician worked for at least 1 full year between January 2019 and January 2021, they can bypass the specific education and training program requirements.
That's a very, very specific window, 2019 to 2021. Why then?
Think about what was happening in the world during that exact window.
The pandemic?
The height of the COVID-19 pandemic. If you were working in a pharmacy on the front lines through that absolute crisis, the state is essentially saying, okay, you have proven your competence under fire. We're not going to make you jump through hoops that are really designed for new people entering the field.
It's a sign of respect, really.
It is. It's a pragmatic way to retain that invaluable experience.
But, and I saw this in the notes, it's a big but, grandfathering does not get you out of the safety checks.
No, that part is completely non-negotiable. It doesn't matter if you're a 16-year-old trainee, a brand new hire, or a 20-year veteran applying through the grandfathering clause. Everyone must submit to an FBI fingerprint-based criminal history check.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. And that's new. It ensures a baseline level of public safety that just wasn't there before on a state level.
And there's one more requirement that feels very specific to Pennsylvania's focus on social welfare. It's something a lot of healthcare workers have to do.
The child abuse recognition and reporting training.
Right. The mandatory reporter training.
Yes. It's a 3-hour course you have to take initially, and then a 2-hour refresher every renewal cycle. And it really reframes the job. A pharmacy technician isn't just a clerk anymore. They are a mandated reporter.
Okay.
They're a healthcare worker.
So they're part of that safety net?
Absolutely. They see families, they see children day in and day out. If a tech sees a child come in with suspicious bruising or signs of neglect or hears something concerning, they are now legally obligated to report that to Childline.
That puts a very heavy responsibility on that 17-year-old registered tech.
It does,
Mm-hmm.
but it reflects the reality that pharmacies are often the most frequent, most accessible touchpoint people have with the entire healthcare system. You might see your pharmacist 10 times a year and your doctor only once.
Okay, so we know who they are now. They're registered, they're background checked, they're trained. Let's talk about what they can do, because I feel like this is where a lot of the public confusion comes in. I see techs running around looking like they're doing everything.
The scope of practice is a bright line in the sand, and it's defined as much by what they can't do as what they can.
Let's start with the can't. What is the absolute third rail for a technician?
Clinical judgment. A pharmacy technician cannot, under any circumstances, perform any duty that requires professional clinical judgment.
Yeah.
That is reserved solely for the pharmacist or a pharmacist intern under direct supervision.
So give me a concrete example, the big one.
Patient counseling.
So if I walk up and ask the tech, hey, will this new antibiotic make me nauseous? They can't answer me, even if they know the answer.
Legally. No, they absolutely cannot answer that, even if they've heard the pharmacist give the same speech about that antibiotic 1,000 times. Their only correct response is, let me get the pharmacist for you.
That feels inefficient from a customer's perspective, but I guess I get it. You don't want hearsay medicine. You want the licensed professional.
Exactly. They also cannot perform a drug utilization review, or DUR. You know, when the computer screens flash a big red warning about a potential drug interaction or an allergy, a tech can't just click override and move on. A pharmacist has to look at that, assess the clinical risk, and make a decision.
Okay, here is the one that I think tricks people up the most. The telephone. The constantly ringing phone.
The bane of every pharmacy's existence, yes.
Can a technician take a new prescription over the phone from a doctor's office?
No, absolutely not. Not a new one. If a doctor calls and says, hi, this is Dr. Smith, I need to call in a script for amoxicillin for Jane Doe, the technician must, by law, hand the phone to a pharmacist or a pharmacy intern.
Why? I mean, it feels like it's just writing down words. What's the risk?
Is it, though? Did the doctor say 15 milligrams or 50, 5-0? Did they say clonidine for blood pressure or Klonopin for anxiety? Those sound alike on a bad phone line, but are dangerously different drugs.
Huh.
A pharmacist has the clinical background to hear that, question it, and catch a potential error during the transcription process. A technician, who might not have that deep pharmacological knowledge, could just transcribe a lethal error without even realizing it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense now. So what can they do? What's their lane?
They can do the mechanics, the process. They are the engine room of the pharmacy. They can do data entry, typing the prescription information into the computer. They can count the pills. They can pour the liquids. They can label the bottles. They handle inventory management, ordering drugs, managing stock.
So they keep the ship moving?
They keep the ship moving so the pharmacist can stay on the bridge and actually steer making the clinical decisions, counseling the patients, talking to doctors.
And the pharmacist is always the captain of that ship.
Always. The law is crystal clear on this. The phrase is direct and immediate personal supervision. The pharmacist is ultimately 100% responsible for every single thing that happens in that pharmacy. If a tech miscounts and a patient gets hurt, it's the pharmacist's license on the line.
That is a heavy, heavy burden. But it leads us perfectly into the next theme. We're talking about burdens, and specifically the burden on patients of just trying to get their medication during a shortage. So, theme 2, the battle for access.
This is the Schedule II crisis in a nutshell.
I think everyone at this point knows someone, or has been that someone, who has struggled to get their ADHD meds Adderall, Vyvanse over the last few years. The shortage has been absolutely brutal.
It has. And what most people don't realize is that the legal framework in Pennsylvania made a bad situation exponentially worse.
Explain that, because I remember reading that the federal government actually tried to fix this.
They did.
Huh.
So let's back up. Schedule II drugs are the most tightly controlled category of legal medications. We're talking about things like OxyContin, Adderall, Ritalin. High potential for abuse.
Right.
Because of that, the rules have always been incredibly rigid. And traditionally, one of the biggest rules was you could never, ever transfer Schedule II prescription.
So if I had my doctor send my electronic script to the CVS on Main Street and I called them and they said, sorry, we're out of stock.
It was stuck there. It was legally marooned at that pharmacy. You couldn't just say, okay, no problem, can you please forward it to the Walgreens on Broad Street? The pharmacy was legally prohibited from doing that.
So what did the patient have to do? Go back to square one?
All the way back to square one. You had to call your doctor's office. Hi, it's me again. CVS is out. Could you please cancel that script and write a totally new one to Walgreens? Then you wait. Then the doctor's office, which is already swamped, has to process it. They send the new one. Then you call Walgreens. And oops, Walgreens just sold their last bottle 5 minutes ago.
And you have to start the whole infuriating process over again.
And repeat. It was an administrative nightmare that left thousands of patients without their essential medication for days, weeks, sometimes months. It was a public health failure.
But the DEA, the federal agency, they saw this happening, right?
They did. They saw the chaos. So in August of 2023, they updated their federal rule. They officially said, we will now allow the one-time electronic transfer of unfilled Schedule II prescriptions.
A common sense solution. But Pennsylvania said, not so fast.
Exactly. In the U.S. legal system, there's a principle called preemption. If a state law is stricter than a federal law, the stricter state law wins. And the PA Pharmacy Act of 1961, in Section 4, 3.1, explicitly prohibited transferring Schedule II.
So even though the DEA gave the green light nationally,
PA pharmacists had to keep the red light on. Their hands were tied by a state law written when the Beatles were still a club band in Hamburg.
that must have been unbelievably infuriating for pharmacists. They're on the front lines dealing with desperate patients, and they have to say, sorry, I can't help you because of this 60-year-old law.
It was awful. They wanted to help their patients, but the law wouldn't let them. It was a huge source of burnout and moral injury for the profession.
Enter House Bill 60.
The legislative fix. Finally, as of our source material, this bill successfully passed the House in March of 2025. It specifically amends the Pharmacy Act to finally align Pennsylvania with the federal regulation.
So walk me through the new reality. It's 2026, my pharmacy is out of Adderall. What happens now under this new law?
Okay, so if, and this is a key condition, your prescription was sent electronically.
Which almost all of them are now, right? The e-prescribing mandate.
Yes, that's Act 96. We'll get to that. But assuming it's an electronic prescription, the pharmacist at the out-of-stock store can now transfer it directly to the pharmacist at the in-stock store.
Can a tech do this transfer?
No. The law is very, very specific. This must be a communication directly between two licensed pharmacists. Again, these are high-risk, high-diversion potential drugs. The state wants the highest level of accountability on that transfer.
And it's just a one-time thing. You can't bounce around the city looking for the book price?
Correct. It's a one-time transfer for the sole purpose of getting an initial fill completed. And that's another crucial point.
ICA?
It has to be for an unfilled prescription.
Meaning you can't transfer a refill.
Well, Schedule II drugs never have refills. By federal law, every single dispense is considered a new prescription. So this rule is strictly for that initial prescription that couldn't be filled due to a stock issue.
What about other controlled substances, like Schedule 3, 4, or V? Things like Tylenol with codeine or Xanax or Lyrica.
Those were already transferable. The rules for them have been in place for a while. Usually they can be transferred on a one-time basis. The exception is if two pharmacies share a real-time online database like two stores from the same chain.
Two CVS stores, for example.
Exactly. In that case, they can transfer the prescription back and forth up to the maximum number of refills authorized by the doctor. But HB 60 was specifically and urgently needed to unlock the Schedule II.
It just feels like such a common sense change, but it really highlights how the law can lag so far behind the practical reality of people's lives.
The law is a slow-moving container ship. The drug supply chain and patient needs are a speedboat. They're just not on the same timescale.
Speaking of the supply chain, let's talk about the sharks in the water, Theme 3, the invisible hand. We're talking about pharmacy benefit managers or PBMs.
If you really want to get an independent pharmacist's blood pressure up, just whisper the letters PBM in their ear.
I've heard this. So PBMs are the middlemen, right? They sit between the insurance company and the pharmacy, and they manage the prescription drug benefits.
That's the idea, yes.
And Pennsylvania recently passed a landmark piece of legislation, Act 77 of 2024, to basically declare war on them.
War is not too strong a word. Governor Shapiro signed this in July 2024, and in his public statements, he explicitly blamed PBM greed for the closure of dozens of independent pharmacies across the state. Act 77 is formally called the Pharmacy Benefit Reform Act, and it is a huge deal.
What were they doing that was so bad? The research notes mention something called patient steering. What is that?
This is a classic anti-competitive tactic.
Yeah.
You have to understand that many of the largest PBMs are vertically integrated. That means the same massive corporation that manages your drug benefits also owns its own mail-order pharmacy and specialty pharmacy.
So they have a massive built-in conflict of interests.
Massive. So what they would do is steer patients to their own in-house pharmacy. They'd rig the system. They'd say, if you go to your local neighborhood drugstore, your copay for this maintenance medication is $50. But if you use our mail-order pharmacy, it's only $10.
So they make it financially painful to support your local business.
Exactly. Or in some cases, they would just flat out refuse to cover certain expensive maintenance meds if they were filled at a retail store. They'd force you into their mail order. Act 77 now prohibits this. It bans PBMs from requiring patients to use a PBM-owned affiliate pharmacy.
So it's about restoring patient choice.
It's about patient choice, and frankly, it's about keeping local businesses alive. If you steer all the profitable, high-volume maintenance medications to your own mail-order service, the local pharmacy can't survive just selling antibiotics and greeting cards.
The other term from the research that just jumped out at me was clawbacks. That sounds like something a raptor does.
It feels like it to the pharmacies. Imagine you run a bakery. You sell a cake to a customer for $20. You get paid. 2, 3, even 6 months later, the credit card company takes that entire $20 back from your bank account because they claim you didn't dot the I on the sales receipt.
That was actually happening to pharmacies.
Constantly.
Yeah.
PBMs would conduct these retroactive audits months or even years after the fact. They would find some trivial clerical error, a typo in the doctor's DEA number, a missing digit in the zip code, and they would recoup the entire payment for the drug. Not a portion. The whole thing.
So the pharmacy is out the cost of the drug and the payment, a total loss.
Total loss. Act 77 puts severe limits on this practice. It says you can't retroactively take money back for these minor technicalities that cause no actual harm to the patient or the payer.
And what about spread pricing? That sounds more subtle.
This was the invisible profit machine. Here's how it works. The PBM charges the insurance plan, say your employer, $100 for a specific drug. They then turn around and reimburse the pharmacy only $10 for dispensing that exact same drug.
And they just pocket the $90 difference.
They pocket the $90 spread, and the employer, the one paying the bills, often has no idea this is happening. Act 77 attacks this by demanding transparency. PBMs now have to file detailed reports with the state insurance department. And the first of those big reports are due on July 1st, 2026.
So we are just a few months away from seeing just how deep that rabbit hole really goes.
The sunlight is the best disinfectant. This is a huge step toward understanding where the money is actually going in the healthcare system.
It's really amazing to see the state stepping in so forcefully here. It feels like for a long time this was just seen as business is business and no one wanted to touch it.
Well, when small-town pharmacies started closing by the dozens, leaving what we call pharmacy deserts, where people, especially seniors, couldn't get their meds without driving for an hour, it stopped being a business issue and became a public health crisis. The state had no choice but to act.
Let's pivot from the business side of things back to the clinical side. So, theme 4. We've talked about technicians getting registered and having their roles defined, but pharmacists are evolving too. They aren't just counting pills behind a wall anymore. They are truly becoming providers.
This is the biggest philosophical shift in the profession in a century. For the longest time, the pharmacist was seen as a dispenser, a product provider. Today, the pharmacist is a clinician, a service provider.
And immunizations are the absolute poster child for this evolution.
Absolutely. Think about it. 10, 15 years ago, if you were lucky, you could get a flu shot at the pharmacy. That was it. Today. In September of 2025, the State Board of Pharmacy approved a massive expansion of authority. They officially recognized the guidelines from ACOG, the AAP, and the AAFP as competent authorities.
Okay, stop with the acronyms. Break those down for us. ACOG is?
The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. The AAP is the American Academy of Pediatrics. And the AAFP is the American Academy of Family Physicians.
So why does it matter that the pharmacy board recognized their guidelines? What does that unlock?
It means the guidelines themselves can now act as the authorization for a pharmacist to vaccinate. Before, for certain vaccines, you might have needed a specific patient-by-patient prescription from your doctor, a script that says, please give Jane Doe this shingles vaccine.
Right.
Now, under this new authority, the pharmacist can look at the official CDC and ACOG guidelines, which say all pregnant individuals should get a Tdap vaccine between 27 and 36 weeks, see that their patient fits that criteria, and they can just administer it.
Without having to call the doctor to get a specific script.
Without that specific administrative hurdle. Yes, provided they follow the established protocol. It turns the pharmacy into a primary access point for public health. If a pregnant woman needs her Tdap, or the new RSV vaccine, she doesn't need to make a whole separate doctor's appointment. She can get it while she's already there, picking up her prenatal vitamins.
That is a huge, huge win for access. But it must require more training. You can't just hand someone a syringe and say, good luck.
Oh, no. To have this expanded immunization authority, a pharmacist needs to complete a specific 10-hour training course. They have to maintain active CPR certification. And, this is the lawyer in the room talking, they must carry their own professional liability insurance with a minimum of $1 million in coverage.
That makes sense. If you're going to be performing medical procedures, you need to have medical malpractice coverage.
Exactly. And this new clinical focus is also changing how we train the next generation of pharmacists. We mentioned the interns earlier when we were talking about techs.
The 1,500-hour rule.
Right. To get your pharmacist license in Pennsylvania, you need to complete 1,500 hours of internship experience. For the longest time, the board had this kind of weird, archaic rule where a lot of the hours you did during your school's clinical rotations didn't fully count towards the total. Or you needed a certain chunk of hours to be done outside of your school program.
Which meant students were basically forced to work nights and weekends at a retail pharmacy on top of their studies just to hit a number.
Right. While trying to pass incredibly difficult classes, it was a known recipe for student burnout. The new regulations that came out in 2025 finally changed that. They now allow all 1,500 of those required hours to be earned from within the PharmD degree program's own clinical rotations.
Because modern pharmacy school is basically half clinical rotation anyway, isn't it? The last year is all practical.
It is. The last year of pharmacy school is usually entirely experiential. You are working full-time in hospitals, in clinics, in community pharmacies. The state finally recognized that this is high-quality, supervised training. This change speeds up licensure and lets students focus on learning rather than just clock punching to meet an old requirement.
There's one more piece of this clinical puzzle that I think is literally life-saving, and that's naloxone.
Harm reduction. This is an area where Pennsylvania has actually been a leader. We are deep, deep in the opioid crisis. And for years, PA has had a standing order from the state's physician general.
What'd that mean, a standing order?
It's essentially a statewide prescription for naloxone. The brand name is Narcan, that is written for everyone. It means any pharmacist can dispense naloxone to any person who asks for it. You don't need your own script. You can be the patient, you could be a concerned parent, a friend, a teacher. You just walk in, ask for it, and the pharmacy can dispense it and bill your insurance or a state program.
But there was a specific new update in July of 2025 that involved EMS.
Yes, the leave behind protocol. This is brilliant and so practical. Imagine an ambulance responds to an overdose call. They revive the person with naloxone. But very often, that person, once revived, refuses to go to the hospital.
They wake up, they're in withdrawal, they're scared, they might have warrants. They just want the ambulance to leave.
Exactly. In the past, the EMS crew would have to pack up and leave, and that person was at an extremely high risk of overdosing again an hour later once the initial dose of naloxone wore off. Now, under this new amendment, EMS providers are permitted to leave a dose package of naloxone with the patient or with their family or friends who are at the scene.
So it puts the antidote right where it's needed most for the next few critical hours.
It empowers the community. It's voluntary for other EMS providers, and the law gives them crucial liability protection so they can't get sued for trying to help. It's just a really pragmatic, humane update to the law that will save lives.
Okay, we've talked a lot about expanding access. Now let's talk about the flip side of that coin, control, surveillance, the big brother aspect of pharmacy.
Theme 5. Controlled substances.
If the state is making it easier in some ways to transfer meds and get vaccines, they are also watching the drug supply like a hawk.
They absolutely have to. The opioid epidemic taught us that painful lesson. And the central tool for that surveillance is the PDMP.
The Prescription Drug Monitoring Program.
In Pennsylvania, we call it ABCMAP. That stands for Achieving Better Care by Monitoring All Prescriptions.
A bit of a mouthful.
Government acronyms, you gotta love them. But this database is incredibly powerful. A pharmacist is required by law to query this system before dispensing an opioid or a benzodiazepine, that's things like Xanax or Valium, to any new patient.
Every single time.
Every single time for a new patient. And for existing patients, they have to check it if they have any reason to suspect a problem. They're looking for red flags. Doctor shopping. Why did this patient get 30 Percocet in Pittsburgh yesterday, and now they're here in Harrisburg trying to get 30 more?
And the data is real time, or close to it.
Yeah, very close. Dispensers, pharmacies, doctors who dispense from their offices, they have to report the data to the system within 1 business day. So if you filled an opioid script yesterday afternoon, the pharmacist you see this morning will see it in the system.
That brings me to a scenario that absolutely terrifies me as a patient. Emergency dispensing. What if the PDMP says, I'm fine, I'm not doctor shopping, but I'm out of my pills, it's 9 p.m. on a Sunday night, and my doctor is on a golf course in Florida and not answering his phone?
This exact scenario happens every single weekend in every single pharmacy in America.
Can the pharmacist legally give me my meds to tide me over?
Yes, but with very strict limits. This is covered under the emergency dispensing rule. Now, this primarily applies to non-controlled maintenance medications, things like blood pressure pills, insulin, seizure meds. If the pharmacist determines it's a legitimate need and they can't reach the doctor, they can dispense a supply to get you through.
How much can they give?
The standard rule is a 72-hour supply, 3 days, just enough to get you to Monday when you can call your doctor's office.
That works for pills. A pharmacist can count out 3 pills from a big bottle. But what if it's something like an inhaler? Or a vial of insulin? You can't break those open.
Exactly. You can't dispense 3 puffs of an albuterol inhaler. So the law has a very important exception. If the package size is not breakable, the pharmacist is permitted to dispense up to a 30-day supply.
That is a genuine lifesaver.
It is. Imagine a diabetic patient running out of insulin on a Friday before a holiday weekend. A 72-hour rule doesn't help them if the smallest box contains a month's supply. So that 30-day exception for non-breakable packaging is critical.
But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
There is always a catch. The pharmacist must receive a valid follow-up prescription from the doctor within 72 hours to cover that emergency dispense they provided.
So if I go in and beg for an emergency inhaler, and then my doctor for some reason refuses to write the cover script later?
The pharmacist is in serious legal trouble. They are legally required to notify the DEA if they don't get that cover script for a controlled substance. So if your pharmacist does this for you, you need to understand they are putting their license out on a limb. Do them a favor and call your doctor first thing on Monday and make sure they send that script over.
That is very good advice. Okay, let's hit some of the housekeeping items. Theme 6. These are the nuts and bolts, the things that keep the physical facility legal and operational.
The foundation of the practice, really.
Let's start with physical security. We talked about how high-risk Schedule II drugs are. I always pictured them being stored in a giant bank vault in the back of the pharmacy.
And many pharmacies do have a big, heavy safe for them. But the law actually allows an alternative method called dispersion.
Dispersion?
Dispersing the stock. Instead of keeping all the oxycodone bottles in one highly visible, tempting spot, you mix them in alphabetically with the regular stock on the main shelves. You put the bottle of oxycodone right next to the omeprazole for heartburn.
Hiding it in plain sight?
It's all about obstructing theft. If a robber jumps the counter, they want to be able to quickly sweep all the good stuff into a bag and run out. If the good stuff is scattered alphabetically across 20 different bays of shelving, they can't do that quickly. It buys time. It makes the pharmacy a harder target.
That is really clever. I never would have realized that was the strategy.
Another big housekeeping item is the offer to counsel. This actually comes from a federal law, OBRA 90, but Pennsylvania enforces it very rigidly.
This is when they say, do you have any questions for the pharmacist?
That's the phrase. And here's the perfect tie back to our first topic on technicians. The law is clear. A technician can ask the question, do you have any questions for the pharmacist? But if you, the patient, say yes, the technician's involvement stops there. Only the pharmacist or a pharmacist intern can provide the actual counseling.
And what if I say no? I'm in a hurry, I've taken it before.
The pharmacy has to document your refusal. They'll make a note in their system. If you decline counseling and then you go home and take the medication incorrectly and have a bad outcome, that documentation protects the pharmacy from liability because they fulfill their legal duty to offer.
Finally, what about the big sign that's always on the wall somewhere? The one about generic substitution.
Pennsylvania law permits pharmacists to substitute a less expensive, generically equivalent drug.
Yeah.
Every pharmacy has to have it posted.
It's basically the default mode now, isn't it?
It is, unless the doctor specifically writes brand medically necessary in their own handwriting on a paper script or uses the specific electronic code for it, the pharmacist will automatically swap the brand name for the generic to save you and your insurance company money.
And this now applies to the fancy new drugs, too, the really expensive biologics.
Yes, interchangeable biosimilars. This is the new frontier. Biologics aren't simple chemicals like aspirin. They're complex proteins grown from living cells. But the FDA has started designating certain biosimilar versions as officially interchangeable.
Meaning they've been proven to be just as safe and effective.
Exactly. And if the FDA says it's a match, the pharmacist in PA is permitted to make that substitution.
But they have to tell the doctor they did it.
Yes. For biosimilars, there's an extra step. There's a notification requirement. Within 72 hours, they have to let the prescriber know they made the switch. It's a slightly higher communication bar than just swapping Prozac for generic fluoxetine.
Wow. We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. I mean, from the 16-year-old trainee just starting their career, to the massive PBM reforms that are fighting for the very life of the business, to the clinical evolution of the pharmacist into a true provider.
It really is a state of the union for Pennsylvania pharmacy. Everything is in motion right now.
So when you look at all this together, you take Act 140, Act 77, House Bill 60, all these new regulations. What is the big picture? What's the narrative? Where is all of this going?
I think the trajectory is crystal clear. The pharmacy is ceasing to be a shop, and it is slowly but surely becoming a clinic.
Go on with that. That's interesting.
Look at all the evidence we just discussed. We are professionalizing the support staff with registration and training so they can reliably handle the mechanics of dispensing. We are freeing up the pharmacists from those mechanical tasks and empowering them with expanded immunization authority and independent clinical judgment on things like prescription transfers. We are integrating them directly into the public health grid with naloxone access and PDMP surveillance.
So the long-term vision is that eventually I don't go to an urgent care center for a sore throat test or a flu shot. I just go to my local pharmacy.
That seems to be the legislative intent, yes. To make the pharmacy the primary, most accessible front door to the entire healthcare system. It's convenient, it's cost-effective, it's right there in every community.
I hear a but in your voice.
But the economics have to work. And that is the giant question mark hanging over everything. That's why Act 77 and the fight against the PBMs is so existentially important. You cannot ask pharmacists to function as primary care providers if you are simultaneously reimbursing them at a financial loss for every prescription they dispense. The legal authority is expanding, but the underlying business model is still under siege.
So that's the central tension to watch over the next few years. Will this new urgent care clinical model be able to survive the harsh retail business reality?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. Exactly.
Well, next time you are standing in that line waiting for your prescription, take a second to look around. Look at the new name tag on the technician that says registered. Look at that sign on the wall about generics. Look at the sheer volume of work and responsibility happening behind that glass. It is a massive, complex, highly regulated machine, and now, hopefully, you understand a little bit more about how all the gears turn.
And please remember, if you need a refill on that Adderall, make sure your doctor sends it electronically. It'll save everyone a lot of headaches.
Please, for everyone's sake. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.